Hello, we are announcing a brand new giveaway for 75,000 subscribers. All you have to do is obviously follow me. We are giving away one lightsaber from Art Sabers. They are sponsoring this giveaway, so what you have to do is go to the pinned comment down below, follow Art Sabers on Instagram, like their image, and tag 2 of your friends, and you will be entered into our giveaway. We will be doing this giveaway until we hit 75,000 subscribers here on PPSW. Thank you again for your continuous support. Our story begins in 82 BBY, inside of the aristocratic house of Palpatine on the beautiful planet of Naboo. Sheev Palpatine was born into one of the most influential houses on the entire planet. However, there was something different about him: his lack of ability to use the Force in the slightest. Palpatine's early life was instantly rough. He had an abusive father and a neglectful family. Without the aid of the Force, he would never have the ability or the interest in killing his parents. Palpatine resented his parents, but he never let them get under his skin. They put him in the best schools on Naboo, and he lived a rather luxurious lifestyle from a young age. Palpatine had no real interest in politics, but because of his parents, he was essentially forced into politics at a young age, partaking in adolescent programs for politicians, in which they would run mock trials and play out situations and model intergalactic policy. To be a senator took a given individual to have a lot of knowledge, and luckily for Palpatine, he loved to learn. Despite his parents forcing him into political atmosphere, he had a very large fascination in people and in galactic norms. Being a kid growing up in luxury almost demanded that he be interested in anything else, but as a child of an aristocrat, he found great fascination in the lives of the commoners. So much so that he wished to understand their way of life. It was a rather obscure view of everything for him. Sure, his disliking for his parents was considerable, but he was by no means a product of his parents or their disdain for just about everything. As he grew up into a young adult, he found that he had a voice of his own, rather rebellious, but it was his own, differing in policy decisions from his own parents, though not conveying it initially. Sheev was a smart man, having spent most nights throughout his adolescence reading and studying the current geopolitical situation meant he was very well informed past what his parents told him to believe. Palpatine, through using his intellect, knew that he could build himself a political following thanks to the influence of his father. While the audience he would get was from his parents, wasn't exactly what he wanted to represent, he would be able to manipulate his vote from these individuals and then change his own policy to his own beliefs slowly over the course of his time in office. Though Palpatine had a couple of years before he could really get there, which is why during this time he made as many friends as he could. One of those friends ended up being a young prominent banker from the planet of Megiddo, Hego Damask II. This young man carried the inheritance of his family wealth, and he was out in the Mid-Rim scouting out possible allies. See, Hego Damask was currently a Sith apprentice. At this point, he hadn't yet killed his teacher, and while he had the intention of doing so, he was using his time wisely. His focus would shift if he was a Sith Lord of the galaxy. Instead of doing that and allowing that to happen, he simply focused on building up a rapport with individuals that would come in favor to him when he became the Sith Lord himself. Plagueis found a particular interest in Palpatine because he was so young and so well informed. It was quite incredible to someone like Plagueis, who had been from one corner of the galaxy to the other. Thanks to Hego's family legacy, he was able to interact with senators within the Republic itself. So here with Sheev himself, he believed and even foresaw greatness in Sheev's future. Though there was one downside that Hego had with Sheev, and it was simply the fact that Sheev wasn't attuned to the Force, though Hego was interested by a possible aspect of the Force. See, Hego, unlike his master, had a large amount of interest in the Force and all of its aspects. He believed that if he could manipulate the Force, he could possibly make Sheev into a more attuned Force individual, therefore turning him into a Sith. It was far-fetched, but it was just an idea that played out in his mind. And yet there was still one issue with it. No matter how much funding Hego gave Sheev, he couldn't just come out and say he was a Sith. There weren't many people who knew about the Sith, but Sheev was so well informed that he actually did. Palpatine wasn't a firm Jedi supporter, and that was mostly because of his father. However, he was coming around to the Jedi and not resenting them as much as his father would have liked him to. The reason being is Sheev had plenty of encounters with the Jedi and had no issues with any of them. He simply saw them as a group of religious individuals freely practicing their religion, so why would he have any input? He wasn't a Jedi or a Sith, and he couldn't use a Force, so what place did he have to say where or what the Jedi could do or be? They simply existed, and in his own opinion, they seemed like they did more good for the galaxy than harm. Palpatine knew that they often acted on behalf of the Senate, but why would he have an issue with this? The Jedi were the added benefit of the job, in his opinion. Though Palpatine noticed that Hego wasn't particularly fond of the Jedi, which was fine. Most people had their own opinions about the Jedi. Most were positive, though from time to time, you got someone like Damask who believed that they were a leech on the Republic. The reason Hego and Sheev got along so well is that Hego believed he could use his financial power to thrust Sheev into a powerful position to support him. Hego was currently working out his own plan to dethrone the Jedi, mostly because his master didn't seem to have the ability to do so. Plagueis wanted to play the longer version of getting rid of the Jedi, but that wasn't easy. They had been established for 25,000 years, and they had been Knights of the Republic for a long time as well. Sure, they were a little more tied to the Republic these days, but getting rid of them would be hard, especially for two Sith. When Palpatine reached his 20s, he kept close ties with his parents for political influence, but he moved out, and began a journey across the galaxy. As a politician, he believed it would be his best interest if he understood more than just Naboo, considering the galaxy was huge and he needed to have the influence as a 20-year-old to earn respect of voters all around Naboo so that he could become the senator of the planet. His long-term goal, obviously, to become Supreme Chancellor, but he and every other senator wanted that outcome. So how could he separate himself from the pack? Being so young, he was already separated from the pack to begin with, but thanks to his older friend Hego Damask, he was able to begin creating allies within the Republic itself. The only thing Palpatine didn't realize was that this was all intentioned on Hego's part. The wealthy Mun was setting up Palpatine with his friends in an attempt to get him to join the ranks of what he would form into a separatist alliance. The irony is that Palpatine believed he was playing Damask, but being that Hego was a Sith Lord, he couldn't really be outgamed in this scenario. Once Palpatine had connections within the Trade Federation, Commerce Guild, Techno Union, and banking clans, he began to get more outreach across the galaxy. Palpatine spent the first 3 years of his 20s making political allies, considering he wasn't at this point eligible to become senator. The age requirement at this point in time was 24, though the current senator in power could change it, meaning that, say, if Palpatine became senator, he could change the age to become senator to the age of 18 and allow whoever he wanted to challenge him. Currently, there was an older man in the power of the Senate on Naboo, and he was corrupt. Palpatine didn't like him, especially because he was close friends with his father. Sheev believed that if he could win the Senate from him, which would be really easily attainable, as many people were already speculating about the role that Sheev would fill, that he would be able to change the entire game of Naboo politics. The current senator was greedy, beyond belief, and while it wasn't uncommon for a senator to be greedy of their own planet, he was greedy against his own planet, which meant he used his campaign funds for building luxurious lake houses and mansions wherever he liked for himself and not for anybody else. Many people only liked him because he was familiar, having run the Senate of Naboo for nearly 3 or 4 decades. The last time he wasn't a senator, he didn't have a wrinkle on his face or even a gray hair on his body. Palpatine was going to change that. After making allies that did go against the Trade Federation, Techno Union, and several of Hego's other partners, Palpatine would announce his run for election of Senator of Naboo. Hego didn't realize that Palpatine was an open book. He believed that he should have allies on every side of the aisle, being there were so many aisles on the inside of the Galactic Senate. Palpatine made friends that were everything. In between and far out, rich and poor, it didn't really matter to him. Sheev's strength was perspective. He used each individual's perspective of the galaxy to form the most cohesive understanding of galactic politics as possible. Upon his return, Sheev ran a successful campaign and was elected into the role of Senator of Naboo. It was a proud day for him as he closed in on the steps of his plan. Palpatine learned about a handful of tactics of his parents, many of which he wasn't proud of, but he could use them for his own good. And then he would use them. Manipulation was one of them. He wasn't proud of it, but it got him the influence from his parents, and it got him financial support from Hego. Now, Palpatine was a senator. He didn't need either of them. With a paycheck from the Galactic Republic filling his pockets, and the ability to determine how his supporters, and even those who didn't support him, viewed him, he could do what he wanted. So immediately, he changed the age to become senator on Naboo to 18, so that young minds like him could become involved. He then continued and undid just about everything his father's friend had in place. This blindsided Damask, who reached out to find out what Palpatine was doing. The young senator told his friend that he was securing growth for himself and his allies. If he could be given this time inside of the Republic, then Naboo would do better, and so would the Republic. Though Palpatine's starry-eyed view of the Republic instantaneously changed once he was in office. The entire Republic was off kilter. It was far more corrupt than he could have ever imagined. Each senator was getting paid off by some large company. Some of them were the Trade Federation, others were shipyards, for example. It was despicable, and it horrified him. Sheev found more interest in the Jedi on Coruscant than his peers within the Galactic Senate. He believed that the Senate planet wasn't corrupt, and he was shocked when he got there, only to learn the opposite was true. A little bit of him died inside when he learned how entangled the Jedi truly were with the Republic. To Sheev, once he broke past his father's views of the Jedi, he saw the Jedi like superheroes, the capes, the lightsabers, the heroics. What wasn't there to love about them? Aside from their interest in galactic politics, of course. Once Palpatine settled into his office, he had a heart-to-heart with himself, because instantaneously he felt like he couldn't do anything. Like there was no change that could be made to save this Republic. The Republic stood for 1,000 generations, and he loved the Republic. He loved democracy. To watch it crumble would be heinous, and it would be despicable. To sit there and watch it without doing a thing was hopeless, but what could Palpatine do? He was the son of an aristocrat. This wasn't his place. His job was to take money away from the poor, blame the rich, and do nothing about it. He wasn't meant to care about anyone but himself. But it was his parents' fault. Their influence on him was definitely negative, but because of them, he vowed to be everything they weren't. And being greedy was something he wasn't going to do. Had Sheev had the Force when he was younger, surely he would have been much different of an individual. But having to grow up in that household for so long forced these views into his mind. It turned him into a politician's worst nightmare. He was now a politician that could very easily change the course of the Galactic Republic if he wanted, but how could he? It wasn't as easy as it seemed originally. Palpatine's heart-to-heart brought him back to how he got elected in the first place. Sure, he was still friends with Damask and the rest of the nearly separatist allies, but there was something there. The Republic wasn't too far gone yet. All he needed to do was act. The issue with the Republic was the corruption. The chancellors, the senators, all of them were very easily bought by large companies. If Palpatine could revolt against that, no. If Palpatine could use that, he could change the entire system. See, Palpatine already lived a luxurious life, and he knew about how terrible the galaxy truly was, having spent 3 years everywhere else across the galaxy, and he found out that there were terrible atrocities everywhere. There was infighting on certain planets, slavery, starvation, famine, and pure desolation elsewhere. So Palpatine conjured up a plan to play the game that his constituents and his peers wanted him to play. He would build up a reputation, and then he would use his elegance of speech and his brilliance of mind to work his way to the top and become the top dog in the Republic, and then he could do what he wanted. Of course, Palpatine had to ensure he kept winning Naboo elections, so he used the status quo and expanded upon it, helping out people that voted for his political adversary and turning their votes into his. This did drive individuals away from his platform. What with a name like Palpatine, he still had the finances and the majority of the vote that he needed to continue staying in office for senator. Hego noticed these policy changes and he felt like there was possibly other motives for this young friend of his, but Sheev told Hego that this was simply him putting away deals that didn't benefit him. Hego did find this a little bit odd, but Palpatine was simply a genius, because while yes, all the policy changes he made meant that he couldn't technically legally launder money, it did open up discussion for the people of Naboo. Many of them had no clue that senators for years, and even at that, aristocrats had been doing the exact same thing and getting away with it. To the people of Naboo, it earned their trust in Palpatine, but slowly and surely, the aristocrats of Naboo fell from their grace. This calculated move by Palpatine had a short-term loss in revenue, but within a year, his funding increased tenfold. Palpatine didn't care about the money, firstly because he was a senator of the Republic, and secondly, he had taken more than enough money from his parents to build a skyscraper on Coruscant and call it Palpatine's Palace and live in it by himself. But he wouldn't do that. Because of this move, it kept the interest of Hego's allies and of course Hego himself. It was the type of move that made the Mask start to fear the political ideology of his young friend. He still believed that Palpatine was an ally, but seeing how quickly Palpatine could manipulate the system to serve himself really genuinely surprised him, but it intrigued him more than he would let on. One couldn't blame Plagueis though. He had just killed his master and was finally getting the reins in for himself. The excitement for him was through the roof. With Palpatine's plans in motion, he very quickly gained allies, though some of the longtime politicians didn't like him immediately. A lot of the politicians who had been in the Senate for decades were taking advantage of their constituents, and when they saw Palpatine rolling in, they immediately tagged him as a red flag towards their operations. This didn't stop the young senator either, especially as he was very quick to ally himself with the Jedi. His twisted ways made him believe that the more allies he had, the better off he would be, but allying himself with the Jedi was one of the first few mistakes he made. It wasn't the Jedi themselves that were the issue. It was more or less the tradition of the Republic to avoid intermingling between the Jedi or the Sith. Well, mostly the Jedi. There were two Jedi in particular that Sheev became friendly with, the first one being Jedi Grand Master Yoda, the second one being Master Dooku, who was currently training his very young apprentice Qui-Gon Jinn. While this could be considered the few early mistakes made by Palpatine, it wouldn't change the trajectory of his political career. He kept these allies a secret, just as he did with the allies that he made with Hego Damask's friends. As politics are in the Galactic Republic, time would pass by. Sheev would continue to win elections in the meantime, and slowly but surely break away from the ideas of his father and make his own opinions towards the forefront of his platform. At this point, he stopped talking to his parents entirely, having vowed to never talk to them again. Palpatine was now taking visits into the Outer Rim to see what the Republic could actively do to participate in its rebuilding. But this idealist mindset for Sheev was shifted when he remembered that this was no longer an era of the High Republic. Sometimes Sheev would have long discussions with his friend Master Yoda about the days of the High Republic, having that Yoda has lived through the High Republic. Yoda had fond memories of that time. As Grand Master, he had plenty of happiness, but there was a lot that irked him. Palpatine asked his elder friend what he thought about Palpatine running for Supreme Chancellor. Yoda encouraged it, because he believed that Sheev would make a fine Chancellor of the Galactic Republic. The youth in Palpatine, which at this point was in his late 20s, was inspiring to the Jedi Grand Master. Yoda saw the corruption through the lens of which Sheev displayed it, and how he talked about it, of course. Palpatine always talked highly of the Republic, but he was also wise enough to see the cracks in the system. Palpatine took Yoda's advice, and at his next opportunity, he would run for the role of Supreme Chancellor. His first attempt would be painstakingly obvious that he still had much to learn, as he was quickly beaten by the returning Chancellor. Palpatine knew that he could do it. He just needed more time. Hego Damask, while still unaware of how close Sheev was to the Grand Master of the Jedi Order, would see Palpatine's push for the role of Supreme Chancellor and warn him that his allies would likely see this as a betrayal, to which the young Sheev reminded Plagueis that he was doing this on their behalf. There was no point in him turning his friends into enemies. Damask knew this and understood it, which is why he believed that Palpatine wouldn't do anything to jeopardize those relationships. Sheev at the moment had plenty of time to build up a case for the Republic to turn him into the Supreme Chancellor, so he did everything to encourage his constituents to believe in him. Palpatine went back to his roots, and he revisited the Outer Rim to find out all the issues happening inside of Republic control. And then from there, Palpatine used his personal funds to hire private investigators to dig up all the dirt he could possibly find on all of his rivals. The irony of the sinister plot is just that. It wasn't sinister. Sure, paying off several private investigators and even mercenaries seemed negative, but the entire purpose of doing so was to bring the corruption inside of the Republic to its knees and to push forth democracy. Palpatine saw the inner workings of Hego's circle, and he saw the plan unfolding. One plan to bring the Republic down in what would likely be a militaristic attack. Palpatine knew that the Republic likely wouldn't be able to stand the test of time against the armies of the Trade Federation and Techno Union alone, let alone anything else. So, every meticulous move he made, he studied 3 times before making it, though Sheev saw opportunity in the market of exposing corruption and taking it down. Palpatine saw this as positive for reducing the amount of peers that would want to take him down, as well as promotion for his own campaign. For the entire term length of the sitting Supreme Chancellor, Sheev would do everything in his power to uproot any little tidbit of information that he could use to throw his opponents under the pod racer. When the time came, he executed his masterful plan, pulling together the most eloquent speech heard in generations and using legitimate facts rather than what people wanted to hear. He addressed problems in the Outer Rim, most specifically slavery, the crime lords, and the lack of Republic authority. He then exposed constituents across the board, and unlike in his first attempt, this time he was elected, though his friends immediately turned to enemies. Palpatine exposed every negative individual within the Senate, many of which were supported Hego's allies. Hego was very upset by this, and began a ruthless campaign to have his former ally assassinated, of course privately. Palpatine, being close friends with the Jedi, would avoid this assassination attempt through pure luck. He was having a discussion with Grand Master Yoda when a big-time bounty hunter attempted to murder the Supreme Chancellor. Had Yoda not been there, she would have died, a martyr of his generation. Palpatine found this rather repulsive, but he knew the cost of his duties. He was heralding a new era of the Republic. Palpatine often referred to it as a golden era, a golden republic. A more luscious name would be a gilded republic, though that day was far from now, and it was undecided if it would ever come. due to the assassination attempts on Palpatine. Though with insider knowledge on all of his political opponents, and even those who used to be allies, he was able to form a plan that would correctly bring together all sides of the political atmosphere for the Republic that he believed would best suit the Republic. At this point, since his assassination, Palpatine would be followed and protected by 2 Jedi Masters at all times. For the most part, it was his good friend Master Dooku. Palpatine didn't mind this. He believed that if the Jedi thought it were necessary, he would trust their work. Though Palpatine was very unnerved by the lack of communication between him and Hego Damask and all their allies. Sheev knew that these individuals weren't past doing something rather rambunctious, so he had informed Grandmaster Yoda and Master Dooku that he believed that Hego's allies were planning to dissolve the Republic and assassinate him. Obviously, Palpatine was unaware of Hego or his plans, but he was close to their circle at one point. The Jedi couldn't just investigate without motive, so Palpatine provided the only evidence he could, the fact that they were from being allies to being nothing, and at the same time, the assassination attempts began. There was also trouble because politicians running for Senate were being threatened, quieted, or assassinated for following Palpatine's idealistic views. That would be enough of a motive for the Jedi to investigate, and so they would go undercover as operatives to search into Hego Damask. At the same time, Palpatine would commission a massive Republic military. Well, not massive. It was more like 30 million soldiers, and several naval vessels supplied by the Kuat shipyards. The reason for this is, upon Palpatine's unveiling of slavery in the Outer Rim publicly, he would send a military force into the Outer Rim to repress the criminals and force the slaves into freedom. His plan included the destruction of the crime lords and the release of every slave in the Outer Rim. Of course, this would initially be costly for the Republic, but the long-term investment would have funds returning to the Republic in due time. Palpatine for months would undergo scrutiny from opposition leaders for simply doing the best thing for the Republic. Irony. As the funds left the pockets of the politicians, it began to fill the people of the Outer Rim with a new sense of peace and placement in the wider Republic and in the galaxy. During these same months, a number of Jedi Masters would discover that Hego Damask II was secretly a Sith Lord. The Jedi would kill Plagueis and capture his young student in Maul, and bring him to the Jedi Temple to recondition him. Luckily at this point, Maul was just a child, so it wouldn't be an impossible task. With the Sith completely gone, the project on reconstructing the Republic's stance towards the separatist movement began. There were several senators that disagreed with the Republic. Most of this had to do with the distasteful taxation of the Republic, and even more than that, the neglect of planets outside of the galactic core. Many of the individuals who were bought over by the Commerce Guild, Trade Federation, Techno Union, and banking clans were won over by Sheev's focus on the galaxy outside of the core. Of course, not all of them did, but the general consensus was a wider change within the Republic. Palpatine would restructure the Galactic Senate, and when everything was happily put into place, he left office without holding on to too much power, believing that the next generation, who were inspired by him, would fill his shoes. All of Palpatine's good deeds were inspired by the lack of love shown to him in his life by his parents. He had 2 choices from adolescence: rise above what his parents gave him or succumb to their ways. Palpatine rising above was a godsend for the galaxy, and when he retired a hero. With the Sith gone and the Separatists non-existent, the galaxy would have a shot at returning to a High Republic, an age of a gilded Republic. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is our story. Again, special thanks to Benjamin Wells, Tiger Boy, Darth Revan, Pimp Daddy Bane, The Last Jedi, Apollo, Jedi Sloth, Mad Natty Studios, Anakin003, Lemon Knight, Flan Van Cease, and Lord Deadwing for supporting the channel. Hit 2,000 likes on this video. Let's talk about the story for real quick. So this one video I wanted to highlight. It's hard to work with Palpatine, obviously. Palpatine's the main villain. I say this quite a bit, but this was fun because I got to focus on Palpatine as a whole. And see, without the Force, Palpatine is just smart. Like, he's just a really incredibly smart dude. And so it was kind of fun to have Palpatine in this light side role. We've done it twice before with, like, what if the Sith and the Jedi were swapped, and what if Palpatine was a Jedi Master. And I really like playing with Palpatine like this because, like, not just because he's a good guy, but, like, because he's just such a smart individual. He's kind of he's kind of the greatest villain of all time, and so like it's kind of hard to make him fallible, and so making him fallible is always really difficult to do. And when I get to do this, it's really fun, because Palpatine is really the whole reason why the Republic crumbled, or the whole reason why the Republic went to war, the whole reason why Dooku left the Jedi Order, why the clone army was created. He's like the main person that started all that. Like, he got all that together, and just that's because of him. And so if you remove him from that equation, yes, Plagueis is smart. He's not like your typical Sith. He's kind of like more interested in the Force. When you get someone like Plagueis, who is very interested in politics but not a good politician like Palpatine, he's gonna mess up at some point. And that was kind of the case that I wanted to show here, is that Plagueis, if he didn't have Palpatine, would have messed up at some point. It was just a matter of time that he would mess up. And I think he would mess up with someone as smart as Palpatine. Now, if you remove Palpatine entirely from the equation, maybe it wouldn't happen, but this is a story about Palpatine, and that was a fun story about it. It's like this entire story is about Palpatine as a whole. Obviously, our characters, you know, like Yoda and Dooku, I could see them both becoming kind of closer allies, like especially Dooku and Palpatine, but yeah, overall, I hope you all enjoyed this. This was a fun video. Anyways, I love you all. Spread the love. And always remember, my friends, may the Force be with you.